If you're doing a qualitative PhD and your introduction chapter feels a bit vague and a bit unfocused, then that is not a writing problem, that is a thinking problem. Many qualitative PhD students believe that they're struggling with how to write an introduction chapter. But what they're actually struggling with is understanding the shape of their project clearly enough to introduce it well. And that is a very different issue. Today, I'm going to explain what a thesis introduction chapter is actually doing and why it's a terrible idea to write one up if you are in the middle of a literature review or data analysis or data collection. Let's get into it. At a very high level, your thesis introduction chapter addresses three core questions. What is this research doing? Why does that matter? And how is it going to unfold? That's it. And in qualitative research, this becomes a lot more nuanced because you're not just introducing a topic. You're introducing how you're approaching meaning, how you're thinking about context, and how interpretation is being handled. So the introduction is not just a decorative opening chapter. It's not just a warm-up. It is your first act of intellectual positioning. And most advice out there online about the introduction chapter includes things like crafting compelling, elaborate, wordy sound bites or polishing paragraphs. But I think you need something a lot more deliberate than that. Before you start writing, you need to see the shape of this. One of the most common mistakes in a qualitative PhD is writing a full introduction way too early, when your title is still evolving, your aims are sharpening, your research questions may well shift, and your theoretical commitments haven't really been made yet. That is not a good time to write it up. If you start writing polished prose whilst your research is still in progress, you're certainly going to have to undo it later. Instead, what you need is an indicative outline. An outline is not a rough draft, it's more of a map. It allows you to rehearse the structure of your thinking without locking yourself into language that your future self might outgrow. This is particularly important in qualitative research, where clarity develops through things like reading, reflexive thought, and early engagement with the data. Let's make this practical. Here is an outline structure that you can use to start mapping out your introduction chapter. Not in full paragraphs, but in notes, in bullet points. This is the hook. Your examiner reads it and they think to themselves, "Ooh, how interesting, tell me more." You might open with a policy shift, a striking statistic, a moment from practice, a conceptual tension, a particularly compelling thing that one of your participants said. For example, say your PhD was looking at the experiences of mid-career private sector professionals who wanted to retrain as school teachers in the USA. You might eventually open with something like this. Over the past decade, school districts across the United States have increasingly turned to career changes to address teacher shortages. But surprisingly little is known about how mid-career professionals experience this transition into teaching. The important thing to remember is this. You don't need to finalise this now. These kind of openers become stronger when your understanding of your field has deepened and you've got a really good sense of your positioning within it. You are going to learn so much more about what it is you're studying, so save this, okay? Just have it as a placeholder for now. This is where you elaborate on your title. You might paraphrase it in everyday language. Think about how you'd explain it out loud to someone outside of your field. And also, this is the point at which you get very clear about what you're not studying. And that one is really important. To go back to our example projects of mid-career private sector professionals who want to retrain as school teachers in the USA, you might write something like this. This study explores how mid-career professionals in the United States experience the transition from private sector employment into school teaching, and how they make sense of identity, status, competence, and belonging during that shift. And you'd also be clear about what you're not doing. So you're not measuring retention rates statistically. You're not evaluating teacher performance outcomes, comparing salary trajectories, or assessing policy effectiveness. This is not a policy evaluation study. It's an interpretive study of lived experience. And that clarity matters. Being clear about what you're not doing strengthens what you are doing. And if you're struggling to explain your study in simple terms, that might mean that it's still a bit blurry and it still needs a bit more figuring out. That is useful information for you, and it gives you something that you can go and focus on. At this point in your PhD, you've likely already drafted aims and objectives somewhere. That might have been as part of your original research proposal or for an annual review. There's probably already something there. If not, go and check out the video that's appearing on your screen right now, and I will also link to that in the description for later. So you need to put your aims and objectives in your introduction outline. Write them down, have a really good read through them, and just notice which ones feel really solid and which ones feel a little bit shaky, and you think, I could probably do some more work on that. When you see them written down in one place, you start to notice things like overlap and ambiguity. And this is generally a really good thing to do because it helps you tighten up your aims and objectives. In our example projects, looking at the experiences of mid-career private sector professionals who wanted to retrain as school teachers in the USA, you might notice that one of your draft aims says, to explore the motivations of mid-career professionals entering teaching. And another one of your aims says to examine identity reconstruction during career transition. Now, at first glance, those look distinct, but when you put them side by side, you might realise that motivation and identity are deeply intertwined, and you may decide whether both belong at the centre, or whether you can make this one aim rather than two. And this is the kind of noticing that is going to be really good for your introduction chapter, even before you've started polishing sentences. Before we get on to the next thing, I want to hear from you in the comments. Where are you right now in terms of your introduction chapter? Not where you think you should be, but where you are right now. Are you at the stage where you haven't started looking at it yet because the overall shape of your project still feels quite unclear? Have you already written a draft, but something about it feels vague and a little unfocused? Have you got aims and objectives written out, but they don't feel particularly coherent or aligned? Or are you in revision mode? Are you tightening up that introduction just before you submit your thesis? Let me know, get typing down there. Your research questions belong in the introduction chapter because they make your aims something that you can actually research. You are turning those aims, which can be quite broad, big picture things, into precise questions that you can answer. So when you're at the outline stage, list your current research questions, note any tensions between them, flag any that feel too large, flag any that feel vague, and just generally give them a bit of a sense check. Seeing them side by side can be a really helpful thing to do because often we develop research questions in quite a fragmented way. We go back in, we add things to them, we fiddle around with them, and they get done at different stages. But by sitting down and looking at them all together, what can happen here is quite interesting because it often reveals problems that were hidden when they were drafted separately. You might not have looked at all of them in one go like this before. Going back to our example, we might have research questions like these. How do mid-career professionals experience the transition into school teaching? What motivates them to leave established careers? How does this transition affect their professional identity? What systemic barriers influence their integration into schools? Individually, these all sound reasonable, but when you see them together, you might think about these things. So, are motivation and experience separate questions, or is motivation part of the broader narrative of transition? Is the mention of systemic barriers moving you towards institutional analysis rather than the lived experience of your participants? Is the study about identity reconstruction, career change, or educational policy contexts? And whilst you're going through this process, this isn't about deleting questions or starting from scratch. It's about looking at their coherence. This is where a lot of qualitative PhD students feel quite a lot of discomfort, because you're essentially stepping back from what you're doing and saying, well, why does this even matter? And that can feel quite uncomfortable, especially if you're at a stage where it's quite difficult to articulate the value that your research is bringing to the table. So when your introduction is in outline form, here are some of the things you need to think about. Why the issue feels timely, who is affected by it and how, what gap, silence, assumption, or taken for granted idea you're responding to. You don't need a fully formed argument yet, bullet points are enough. But this section is an important one because it stops your introduction from becoming too descriptive. It forces you into thinking about your contribution. For our example project, we might begin with things like this. Teacher shortages remain a persistent issue in multiple US states. Policy conversations often frame career changes as a solution to this problem. Much of the existing research focuses on retention statistics or recruitment pipelines. There is less in the way of interpretive work, exploring how individuals themselves experience this transition. You might also note things like mid-career entrants bringing professional capital that reshape school cultures. Their experiences might challenge taken for granted assumptions about teaching as a linear vocation. And notice that none of this is a polished claim about contribution yet. It's ideas, it's early positioning. You're just identifying the conversation that you're entering. In qualitative research, meanings are often contested, and they're often dependent on the context in which they're being used. As such, your introduction needs to explain how you're going to be using those key terms. Think about key concepts from your title, terms that feel slippery, concepts that are debated in the literature, what you're including and what you're excluding. For the example study, we might want to think about the term mid-career. So how many years does that span? And does this exclude early career switchers? We also need to think about the term private sector. What do we mean by that? Are we including people from non-profit roles? Are we including military veterans, people who were self-employed? We also need to be clear on what we mean by retraining. Are we referring to formal certification only or alternative pathways? And professional identity. What meaning of this are we working with? Are we talking about psychological self-concept, social recognition, some kind of role performance? And we might also ask, are we defining transition as a discrete period or as an ongoing process? Are we focusing only on public schools? Are we including elementary and secondary levels? Thinking about these things means that you're starting to grapple with those conceptual and contextual boundaries. And this section often grows slowly and steadily, and that is absolutely fine. The goal is not to nail down these definitions from day one. The goal is to be thinking critically about the boundaries and the limits of your study. This is the section that explains how the thesis unfolds. You don't need this now. If you want, you might sketch out a rough idea of the chapters, like the example chapters appearing on the screen right now, but you treat them as provisional because you might later realise that, for example, identity needs its own chapter or that policy context belongs earlier. But this isn't something you want to spend a lot of time on right now. Just have it as a placeholder. When you outline your thesis introduction in this way, two things happen. First, it enables you to hold your whole project in full view. And secondly, it gives you a working document that you're able to return to regularly. Each time you revisit it, you'll realise what you're clearer on, what still feels a bit thin, and where your thinking has strengthened. I hope this video has helped you in terms of thinking a bit more clearly about your own introduction chapter. If so, you might enjoy the other videos that are appearing on your screen right now. So go and check them out. I'll see you in there.